The High Court has ruled that states do in fact have the authority to ban transgender athletes from taking part in girls' and women's school and college sports.
A win for common sense has some woke Democrats losing their minds. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to react to the breaking news that the Supreme Court has handed down a decision in the big case that they heard about transgender athletes and essentially whether or not different states, I believe it's 27 states, were allowed to prohibit trans athletes from competing based on their gender identity rather than their biological sex. So basically with the backlash to trans women who are born biologically male in women and girls sports, a bunch of states have passed laws saying, no, we're going to separate sports by biological sex, males and females. People sued, activists sued, and said that that was actually unconstitutional discrimination under the 14th Amendment. This case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, it isn't, and you are, in fact, allowed to have female sports only be for females. The fact that this was even a case, or that many Democrats and elected officials are still doubling down on this crazy take after the ruling, is all demoralizing to me. But at least a win for sanity in my book. We're going to react to some breaking news coverage of this from NBC News and then get into more of the details and the response. Let's get into it.
Coming on the air with some breaking news at the Supreme Court. The High Court has ruled that states do in fact have the authority to ban transgender athletes from taking part in girls' and women's school and college sports. This involves two separate cases, both brought by transgender women. It is expected to have wide-ranging implications. Let us bring in our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. I see that you have been sifting through the decision and the dissent for some time now. Top lines, what does this mean? The
top line here, Craig, is that all of the states, 27 in fact states that have tried to enact these types of bans, trying to make sure that girls' sports teams do not include transgender women and girls, both at the college level all the way down to lower school. Those bans can now stand. As you mentioned, Craig,
so I'll just pause here to say it's interesting because, you know, NBC News is an establishment media outlet with definitely a liberal bias. How the language choices here are very interesting because making states are allowed to prohibit transgender girls from participating in girls' sports is like one way of framing it. Another way is saying biological males are not allowed to participate in women's sports. Or actually, really, to be clear, the Supreme Court isn't ruling on what the policy should be, whether they should or shouldn't be allowed. They're ruling that states which went through the democratic and legislative process to pass a bill saying female sports only for biological females are allowed to do that. And the people who always cheer about democracy are saying, no, 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 they shouldn't be allowed to do that. The Constitution says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, and somehow acknowledging sex and engaging in the same biological separation we've always engaged in sports with no difference and no distinction made to trans or non-trans is discrimination and therefore unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court should strike down these laws and nullify the will of the people, which I'm okay with in cases when it genuinely violates our Constitution, but this is not one of those cases. And it is just funny to see, as we will come to, many of the crowd that like loves to talk about democracy and the people and all this stuff, and suddenly cheering on or asking the courts to block something that's overwhelmingly supported, common sense, not discriminatory, and was passed through the democratic process because it hurts their feelings. And they prioritize, I guess, the wishes and preferences of a few trans-identifying athletes over the sanctity of girls' sports as a concept. Yikes. We'll keep going here.
This involves two different states, West Virginia and Idaho, but the implications are nationwide and far-reaching. The states here said that they had tried to enact these types of bans to protect women's sports, to keep women and girls safe, and also to ensure competition for women and girls' sports. And today, the High Court, in a divided opinion, saying states can, in fact, do that without violating the Constitution, without violating federal law. They say here in part, Craig, in the majority opinion, separate sports teams for biological biological males and biological females are reasonable, given the inherent physical differences between the sexes. Allowing only biological females to play on women's and girls' sports teams can reduce the risk of physical injury and ensure fair competition. The court going on to say what's more,
Sorry, how is this a case? How did 3 justices disagree with this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills when we talk about this stuff, guys, because this is something that is so obviously commonsensical, and we have always separated sports since the invention of female sports and girl sports. The point was that the biological sexes are separated, and then you only compete in the female one if you're female. Then some trans-identifying people who said they wanted to compete in the other one are now saying it's discrimination to not allow them. But it was interesting. I was reading about this case, and the counter argument to that is that they're not being discriminated, even if you were to accept the premise, and this is actually a debated premise, that transgender identity is a protected characteristic that you can't discriminate against. The counter argument to that was successful in this case is the idea that they were not treated differently, whether they're trans or not. If you're a biological male, you're not allowed in the women's sports division under these laws. Whether you're trans identifying or not, doesn't matter. There's no distinction. You're not being treated differently because of your trans identity. You're not being discriminated against because of your trans identity. You're being treated differently because of your biological sex, and that's always been upheld to be allowed in the context of sports. So to me, I don't even understand how this was a legal controversy that made it to the Supreme Court. But lower courts actually blocked these laws as if they were unconstitutional. Crazy town. Absolutely crazy to me.
forcing women and girls to play against biological males can deter some women and girls who would otherwise participate in sports from doing so. They go on to explain further that the Equal Protection Clause allows schools to maintain separate teams for female and male athletes, and schools may do this to determine eligibility for women and girls sports teams based on biological sex. This is constitutionally justified. So again, this has to do with the states of West Virginia and Idaho, but it now means that all those other 27 states, Craig, that have tried to pass these types of bans that have been under some criticism and dispute, those bans should now be also upheld under the Constitution and under Title IX.
So there you kind of have the facts of the case here and the situation. And to me, it's obviously a win for sanity. It's the correct outcome. It has nothing to do with hating trans people or being against trans people living their best lives. But obviously, these biological distinctions matter and exist for a reason. And it not only endangers fairness, but also in some cases safety when you allow biologically or genetically male people to compete in women's sports. Just look at the Iman Khalif situation. It absolutely is something that is crazy that it's allowed in any state, but all this case was about was whether states were allowed to have these laws or not, or whether these laws were impermissible under our Constitution. And there's just really no frame of mind I can wrap my head around that would suggest it's unconstitutional to have women's sports be for women's sports, even though that's what it's always been and is its very purpose, is it to be for female athletes rather than male athletes. It's like they actually were arguing that cannot be allowed. I don't know, man. And then I've talked about this before, but this is such an insane hill to die on. And yet many of them have. By the dozens and dozens, elected Democrats signed amicus briefs demanding that the trans activists win in this case. You know, the different LGBTQ activist organizations have all rallied around this issue. It's actually would have been a common sense compromise to say, listen, we're standing on trans acceptance, trans rights, but we agree that, trans women, because it's also, and progressives simultaneously have a point and don't when they point this out. There's only a very small number of trans athletes. Now, it still matters. It's not irrelevant. It's not inconsequential. It affects people meaningfully in those situations, but it's not a super pervasive thing. It's not something touching everyone's lives. That's true. Sure. But the flip side of that is that also means that very, very few people will even be adversely affected by these laws going into place. And that makes it even more of an insane hill to die on because it jeopardizes and has jeopardized support for the broader LGBT category. I don't like to say community because it's really not very communal in my experience. They're not very loving and welcoming to folks like me who maybe don't think Leah Thomas is a stunning and brave female athlete. Anyway, though, even after this case, some elected Democrats, the more woke progressive types, are standing by this insane position. So we're going to go through some of their tweets and posts. State Senator Scott Wiener, who's about to become most likely a member of Congress, wrote on X, "In upholding trans sports bans, the Supreme Court has once again fueled the campaign to erase and dehumanize trans people, and the way the court wrote the decision opens the door for other efforts to eliminate trans people from public life. Banning trans young people from playing sports is cruel and discriminatory." I actually just disagree with basically every word in this tweet. It is not cruel. It is cruel to female athletes and girls to let their scholarships and competitions be infiltrated by biological males, and it jeopardizes their comfort and safety and the very purpose of these things. That's not very feminist of these Scott Wiener types who surely would call themselves that. And I'm sorry, but I totally disagree that trans people are erased or dehumanized simply by the concept of female sports existing and being upheld. That doesn't dehumanize anyone. Nothing about that says that trans people are not, just as equally human and worthy of dignity and respect and value as any other human being, which I absolutely, of course, do believe. And when they say it opens the door for other efforts to eliminate trans people from public life, that's a good sign that you can't actually defend the merits of this position or case when you have to shift it to other things. And it does or doesn't necessarily, depending on how you extrapolate all of that. But until those cases are before the court, we will analyze whatever he's referring to, which is quite vague. We can analyze that at face value, but at face value, this case is about sports, and it's the correct outcome from any sane perspective. Anyway, more posts here from Senator Ed Markey. "To the trans community in the wake of this Supreme Court decision, this is not the end of the fight. It is only the beginning. This ruling will tear kids away from their teams and the sports they love, but it cannot tear us from each other. Together, we will fight and we will win." You absolutely will not win on this issue, actually, because almost everyone disagrees with y'all and thinks you're insane, and you're not exactly beating those allegations with these tweets. Another representative here, Pramila Jayapal. Quote, "The Supreme Court's ruling to allow states to ban trans kids from playing in sports is discriminatory." I've already explained why it's not, "and opens the door to incredibly invasive examinations of children to determine who can play on what team." Oh my God. I want to go through that on two levels. One, to say that it bans trans kids from playing in sports is not accurate. They can still play in sports according to their biological sex. So you're mischaracterizing it. And then this idea that it opens the door to incredibly invasive examinations of children to determine who can play on what team. This is the most unhinged gaslighting talking point you will encounter. They'll say having these laws, it will lead to genital inspections of young girls or anything psycho like this, as if we don't know what biological sex humans are. As if athletes don't have to undergo a physical in order to participate in sports performed by a doctor, which they do, and that doctor is aware and can note their biological sex. So you do not, in fact, have to have a guessing game or genital inspections or anything of the sort, because we already know the biological sex of every student athlete, and a doctor already examines them. This is not a mystery. We have separated this distinction since girls' sports became a thing, and it is not something we are incapable of doing without some sort of nefarious or creepy thing. It's just one of the most empty and misleading and bad faith talking points you will ever encounter on this discourse. And this discourse is just full of them. And so listen, it is crazy to me that this is even a debate or a policy. But hey, more and more, I just picked a couple. They're just by the dozens. Democratic lawmakers are dying on this hill. They're coming out to this position and saying, yeah, we stand on this. And it makes them look like lunatics. It doesn't, obviously, like I said, it's not the most consequential issue in the world. It doesn't touch most people's lives, but it does serve as something of a sanity test. And unfortunately, 3 Supreme Court justices appointed by Democrats, and then many, many Democratic lawmakers just failed that. Other than that, though, they're doing absolutely amazing. You guys let me know what you think in the comments about all of this. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more of my commentary and analysis, and do consider becoming a channel member to support my work. I try to just offer common sense and independent perspective. I do call out the far left and the far right, and I appreciate all of y'all who are here for that. And it's the best way to support my work. Hit the join button or the link in the description. And with that, guys, we'll leave it there for today. Still can't believe this is actually a case that needed to go all the way to the Supreme Court. But that's where we're at. And at least this time, things ended up making sense. So with that, guys, we'll talk again real soon.